Welcome to the Movie Spoiler Club, the channel where you can watch movie, television, and streaming series within minutes. Today we're going to spoil the movie Catch Me If You Can, 2002. This movie story plot is about Frank Abagnale Jr., Leonardo DiCaprio, worked as a doctor, a lawyer, and as a co-pilot for a major airline, all before his 18th birthday. A master of deception, he was also a brilliant forger, whose skill gave him his first real claim to fame. At the age of 17, Frank Abagnale Jr. became the most successful bank robber in the history of the U.S. FBI agent Carl Hanratty, Tom Hanks, makes it his prime mission to capture Frank and bring him to justice, but Frank is always one step ahead of him. The film opens up on the set of a game show in the 1970s. A charming host with gray hair and perfect teeth resonate on the screen while musical-themed dances in the background. Three men casually take the stage. All three claim to be Frank Abagnale, but who is telling the truth? The movie flashes back in time during Christmas Eve, 1969. Carl Hanratty is an FBI agent who is trying to visit Frank in prison. Hanratty peeks through the door to talk to Frank and go over the case and his charges. Frank interrupts every word with a wretched cough that shakes his body. Frank begs for help, but Carl insists that he just has to hold out until the morning. Then Frank passes out on the floor in the cold, damp concrete cell. The guards rush in to escort Frank to an infirmary where he can see a doctor. The lead guard and Carl sneak a peek behind the curtain and Frank is nowhere to be seen. The music picks up, signaling that Carl has been through this before. Everyone races to shut down the facility before Frank escapes. They catch him crawling through the hall. He must really be sick, but it doesn't stop him from trying to run. The scene flashes again. 6 years earlier, a young and healthy Frank Abagnale sitting at a table while someone with a microphone talks to the crowd. Frank is peeling the labels off of the wine bottles at the table with his mother and father. Turns out Frank Abagnale Sr. is being recognized at the state's Rotary Club. Frank Jr.'s eyes light up as his father takes the stage. His father tells a story about two mice who fell into a bucket of cream. One mouse gives up and drowns in the bucket. The second mouse tries so hard to get out of the bucket, he churns the cream into butter and climbs out. Tonight, his father is that mouse. Later, the family enjoys their time at home. It's nearly Christmas because the lights on the pine tree twinkle in the corner as soft orchestral music swells on the vinyl player. Frank Jr. and his mother are dancing in the living room to the music. His father cuts in, and they tell the familiar story of how they met and fell in love. Frank stares at his parents gleefully and thankful. Frank spends a lot of time with his father. During their time together, it seems that Frank Sr. is quite the charmer, and possibly a con artist. One day Frank Sr. tells his son he needs a suit. They are in a hurry and arrive too early. Frank Sr. uses his Abagnale charm to cheat his way inside the store before business hours. The smile it brings to his son's face is dangerous. Frank Jr. can see his father is smart, and most of all clever. What does a boy want more than a father's love? Approval. In the next few days, the family loses everything because Frank Sr. is being investigated for tax fraud. The shift in livelihood and lifestyle is devastating for the family. A budding con artist himself, Frank convinces an entire class that he is the substitute teacher for his French class. He organizes homework and even plans a field trip before the principal finds out. As Frank settles into his new school and new home, he doesn't seem to notice that his parents aren't handling the change so well. He comes home from school one day to find a strange man in the apartment. He isn't quite sure what to make of the conversation until they explain that his parents are getting a divorce. Frank is directed to go to the kitchen and fill in the blank of which parent he would like to live with after the divorce is finalized. Frank doesn't want to choose, so he runs on his own for the first time in his life. He is perfecting his tricks quickly. One bright afternoon, he takes notice of a pilot getting out with his stewardesses and heading inside the hotel. He looks at him with admiration and maybe some jealousy. Frank decides he is going to be a pilot, or at least pretend to be. Once he gets his hands on a real authentic Pan American Airlines pilot suit, he looks the part, and that's half of it. The other half is research. As a kid himself who just turned 16, he pretends to conduct research about pilots in planes for a school project. Here he gets in touch and builds rapport with a man who offers up any information Frank inquires. Once Frank is in the suit, he is immediately treated with more respect than just a few weeks ago. From his hotel room, he writes to his father. On the first day on the job, he has to strut his stuff because the stakes are high. When a stewardess appears to see through Frank's trick, Frank puts on the charm, using his good looks and his father's lines to get the stewardess into bed. Frank learns to forge checks for a living. His technique gets better every time. Once he graduates, he tells his father to meet him. They're at dinner. He sits down with his father and excited to tell him everything he has done for the family. His father stifles his pride because he knows where it landed him. Frank Jr. tries to give him the key to a convertible for his father, a gift that will surely win over his heartbroken wife. Frank Sr. cannot accept the gift but toasts to his son in celebration. Before they part ways, his father asks, "Where are you going tonight, Frank?" In Los Angeles, Frank has been staying in a motel. The FBI agent, Carl Hanratty, has formed a team to bust Abagnale. Carl finds his room number 201, and when he approaches the door, he kicks him with his weapon drawn. The room is empty, but then Carl hears someone in the bathroom. When Frank emerges, he is calm, cool, and collected. He looks at Carl and introduces himself as Alan, a member of the Secret Service. He claims that he already got the guy and his partner are putting him in the car downstairs. Carl doesn't quite believe him and asks for some identification. Frank grabs his wallet and gives it to Carl. Frank then grabs all the incriminating evidence and says he is going to pack it all up. Carl is confused as he sits down on the bed. Why did he know that the Secret Service was also on the case? He opens the wallet as he searches his mind for the answer. But when he looks inside, there's nothing but labels and wrappers stuffed in it. He throws away the wallet angrily and dashes to the window. Outside, he can see Frank running with the printer under his arm. The two catch each other's stare. On Christmas Eve, Carl receives a call late at night. Frank is calling to chat. Frank tries to tell Carl about the story of two mice, but Carl is not listening. "The house always wins," Carl shouts. He vows to catch him one day. The next morning, while Carl is having breakfast at a diner, he gets a tip that the man named after a comic book superhero. This must mean that this guy reads comics and must be a kid. Using his superior research skills, Carl finds Frank's mother and visits her house. When she pulls out the yearbook to show the agent a picture, Carl recognizes the boy immediately. While Carl is busy putting the puzzle pieces together, Frank is working on his next play. He goes to the hospital and meets a young nurse named Brenda. Brenda just got reamed by a doctor so terribly that she is in tears and fears she may be fired in her first week. Frank is right there to assure her that she is more than competent and perfectly good at her job. He gets her to tell her everything he wants to know. Before he leaves, he smiles at her and asks if they are hiring at the hospital. She asks, "Well, what do you want to do?" That's when Frank decides he wants to be a doctor. He goes back to his room to write to his father and forge his credentials. Brenda and Frank form a romantic relationship. When Frank asks Brenda if she'll marry him, she's giddy. The couple is invited to dinner at Brenda's parents' home. Frank is checking all the boxes on their list. At one time he was a pilot, now he is a doctor, and tomorrow he wants to break into law. Is Frank too good to be true? When her father pulls Frank aside to talk privately, he demands the truth. The truth is, he isn't a doctor or a pilot. He is nothing. Frank is a man who is in love with his daughter Brenda. Brenda's father buys it, hook, line, sinker. The couple is engaged to be married. Frank takes the bar exam and passes, then begins practicing at the same firm as Brenda's father. Life is good, and the future looks bright. He meets his father at a bar one evening to catch up. This time Frank Sr. doesn't look so happy to see his son, and that's because he knows that Carl Hanratty is closing in on the chase. He is worried about his son. Frank Jr. brushes his concerns away and insists that everything is coming together. Frank Sr. confesses that his wife remarried to his best friend and wants nothing to do with him. This news upsets Frank. He says he is going to stop, but his father knows all too well that he won't be able to. Frank Jr. begs his father to ask him to stop, but his father won't. Frank Jr. pushes himself from the seat and storms out. His father calls out, "Where are you going tonight?" Christmas Eve of that year, Frank calls Carl just like the year before. This time Frank is begging for a truce. Carl explains that there isn't a truce waiting at the end of this chase, only prison. Carl senses he is closer than ever to catching this masterful con artist. Carl isn't ready to give up, which means that Frank can't give up either. During the lovebirds' engagement party, Carl catches up. Frank has to think fast. He sneaks upstairs with Brenda to tell her the truth. He tells her his real name, and that he isn't a doctor, or a lawyer, or anyone. He shows her all the money and all the checks. He is throwing some clothes out the window while he tells her to meet him at the Miami airport in 2 days at 10 a.m. She is frazzled but agrees. The agents bust in, but they're too late. 2 days later at the airport, Brenda is there waiting for Frank. Frank is about to meet her, because she is his true love. Before he leaves his car, he notices something strange and then realizes that Brenda is a bait. The agents are using her to get to him. He remains in the car and drives away. Carl thought for sure Frank would show, but he continues to strategize. Their biggest concern is Frank forging a passport and leaving the country, which is exactly what he does. Over the next 7 months, Frank travels the world. Carl is eagerly trying to predict his next move. He takes one of the fake checks and heads to a professional. The experts tell him that it looks like the check was printed somewhere in Europe. This tips Carl off, and he remembers that Frank's mother was from a small town in France. Carl believes that is where he will find Frank and end this chase. Once in Montreal, Carl finds the printing press facility Frank has to be using. He surprises Frank by pulling the alarm. Frank is manic, almost happy to see him. He offers him the best French beans straight from the pot. Carl makes it clear that this is the end of the line. Frank believes it's just a trick. After some quick back and forth, Frank heads for the door with as many checks as he can carry. Carl sternly warns him that if he steps out that door, police officers waiting outside will shoot him. Frank stops and asks Carl to swear it on his daughter's life. Carl agrees. The two shake hands and Carl hands him the cuffs. When they walk outside, there's no one but a church choir singing Holy Night while the snow falls. Then suddenly the police show up and shove Frank into the back of the car. Carl and Frank are on a plane to the United States where Frank will be officially indicted for his crimes. Frank wants to call his father before the news gets out. Carl regrettably confesses that Frank Sr. broke his neck some time ago and passed away. Frank is erratic and devastated. He wants to use the lavatory for some privacy. The plane is about to land and Carl is standing outside waiting. The stewardess insists the men return to their seats. Carl fears that Frank is about to escape. When he finally breaks the door in, sure enough, Frank has fled. Frank dashes home to see his mother. He runs to the front window of the house to peer inside. There he can see his mother, smiling and gazing at someone out of view. He can see her new life with her new husband and daughter. She has moved on without him or his father. Frank sees the sirens and lights in the reflection of the window and turns around to face the police. He salutes the young girl and puts his hands in the air. Once prosecuted, Frank is sentenced to 12 years in prison. There he gets a job where he helps Carl identify fraudulent checks. Carl accepts Frank's help so often that eventually he gets Frank out of prison. Frank can finish his sentence working for the FBI in their fraudulent check department. Frank agrees. The 9-to-5 business day is not exactly what Frank ever envisioned. He does feel free, so one weekend he decides to make a run for it. Carl picks up on the trick immediately and meets him at the airport. Frank is dressed in his pilot uniform ready to fly away, but Carl says that's okay. I won't chase you. He tells Frank he knows that he will be back on Monday. When Monday rolls around and Frank is nowhere to be seen, Carl becomes nervous. Frank eventually finds his way back to the office, where the two exchange their smiles. Frank Abagnale continued to work with Carl until his release in 1974. He went on to design many of the secure checks Fortune 500 companies use. He is now married with 3 sons and lives in the Midwest. Carl and Frank remain close friends to this day. Movie trivia. Do you know that according to the real Frank Abagnale Jr., approximately 80% of the book is true? The screenwriters combined storylines from the book and several characters from the book were merged together for the film. This movie gets the movie rating of 8.1 from IMDb, Tomatometer rating of 96 and audience score of 89 from Rotten Tomatoes. Thank you for watching and be sure to hit like, subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments section, and hit the notification bell for the new movie spoiler video every week.